Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening a file that is, let's just say it's heavy. We're tackling a figure who didn't just participate in the history of the 20th century. He grabbed it by the lapels and shook it.
He really did.
Yeah.
And depending on who you ask, and you mean this literally, right, which side of a border you're standing on, this man is either a Che Guevara-style icon of liberation,
Right. A revolutionary hero.
or he's the absolute godfather of modern political violence. It is so rare to find a single human being who holds such diametrically opposed titles.
We are talking about a man who won the Nobel Peace Prize. He stood on the White House lawn for that. Yet for decades, he was considered by Israel, by most Western intelligence agencies, as an arch-terrorist.
The #1 target on the list for a long, long time.
We are talking, of course, about Yasser Arafat, and I feel like even if you don't know all the ins and outs of Middle Eastern politics, you know the image.
Oh, absolutely.
If I close my eyes and just picture the news from the 70s or 80s, I see him. The military fatigues, the stubbly beard, and that black and white checkered headscarf.
Yikifiye. And even that was a calculated piece of branding. You know, he didn't just throw that on. He folded it specifically on his head so that the tail of the scarf would drape over his right shoulder in the rough shape of historic Palestine.
Wait!
Absolutely. Every single time. He was a master of iconography, of branding, before we really use that word in geopolitics. He understood the power of the visual.
He wore a holster into the United Nations General Assembly.
A holster. It created this whole aesthetic of the eternal revolutionary.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We've got a comprehensive biographical dossier in front of us. It's built from, a huge range of sources. And we want to try and strip away the caricature, the guy on the T-shirt or, the villain in the cartoons, and figure out who was the actual man.
How did he survive? Really, how did he survive assassination attempts that would have killed a fictional action hero?
And how did he take a scattered, desperate group of refugees and turn them into a national movement with a seat at the global table?
To do that, we have to look strictly at the factual records. We have to try to move past the mythology, which is, it's thick on both sides, and look at the engineer, the strategist, and the survivor.
And we have a lot of ground to cover. We're going from his disputed birth to the caves of Jordan, the siege of Beirut, the diplomatic halls of Oslo, and finally, the very, very mysterious circumstances of his death.
So let's start at the beginning.
Or I guess the disputed beginning, because I was really surprised to learn that even his birth certificate is an argument.
That is the first contradiction in a life that is just full of them. If you asked Arafat himself, and he gave many, many interviews on this, he would tell you, I was born in Jerusalem.
Right in the heart of it.
Right in the shadow of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's a powerful origin story. It ties him physically and spiritually to the holy site he claimed he was fighting for his entire life.
It gives him instant legitimacy.
Exactly. But the paperwork tells a different story.
Yeah.
His official birth registration, which was dug up by biographers years later, it clearly puts him in Cairo, Egypt, in August 1929.
So his father was Palestinian?
His father was a textile merchant from Gaza, but the family was living in Cairo at the time of his birth.
So he was an Egyptian Palestinian. Is that fair to say?
Culturally. In many ways, yes. And this is a detail that you have to understand really shaped his psychology. He grew up in Cairo. He spoke Arabic with a distinct, noticeable Egyptian accent.
And other Palestinians would pick up on that.
Oh, they used it against him for his entire career. His political rivals, when things got heated, they'd mock the way he spoke. They'd say, he's not really one of us, he's an Egyptian.
That's got to leave a chip on your shoulder. You're fighting for a national identity that people are telling you don't fully possess.
Absolutely. And his childhood, from all accounts, wasn't easy to begin with. His mother died when he was just 4 years old.
Oh.
That's a trauma that stays with you.
Yeah.
His father, seemingly overwhelmed, shipped Arafat and his brother Fatih off to Jerusalem to live with an uncle for a few years.
Oh, he did live in Jerusalem.
He did, but briefly.
Yeah.
That was his real, tangible, physical connection to the land. He eventually went back to Cairo, and his relationship with his father was, let's call it, toxic.
Distant.
Very distant, very strict. When his father eventually died, Arafat didn't even go to the funeral.
Wow. Okay, sad speaks volumes. But this friction at home, it might have pushed him outward toward politics. And looking through our notes, there's this one incredible anecdote from his teenage years in Cairo that I think just unlocks his whole mindset.
The synagogue visits.
Yes, this blew my mind. So we're talking about the 1940s. Arafat is a teenager living in Cairo, and he starts sneaking out to attend services at local synagogues.
It sounds made up, doesn't it? But it's documented.
Yeah.
When his father found out, he reportedly beat him for it. But when his sister asked him why on earth he was doing it, Arafat didn't say he was converting or anything like that. He said he wanted to study the Jewish mentality.
He was a teenager doing opposition research.
He was. He was reading works by Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism. He wanted to understand his enemy.
That is wildly precocious. I mean, most kids are sneaking out to smoke cigarettes or see a movie. He's sneaking out to do reconnaissance on his future adversaries.
It shows that even then, he was analytical. He treated the conflict not just as, a religious fight or a street brawl, but as a puzzle to be solved. He wanted to know how the other side thought.
And that analytical streak, it makes so much sense because, and this is another fact people often forget because of the military uniform, he wasn't a soldier by trade.
Not at all. He was an engineer.
A civil engineer.
He graduated from the University of King Fahd I. That's a very specific way of thinking. Engineers look at structural stress, they look at leverage, how to build things.
And how to break things.
And how to break things. The engineer and the keffiyeh. It doesn't have the same ring to it as the guerrilla, but in many ways, it's more accurate.
So what does he do with this degree?
Well, in the late 1950s, he moves to Kuwait. He gets a job working in construction. And this period in Kuwait is arguably the most important time in his entire life. If you want to understand the PLO, you have to understand Arafat in Kuwait.
Why Kuwait? Was it just for the job?
It was for the money, and it was for the freedom. Kuwait in the late 50s was a boomtown. Oil money was flowing everywhere. And it was full of educated, professional Palestinians who couldn't go home.
A diaspora community.
A very active one. And Arafat meets key people there. Khalil al-Wazir, who becomes known as Abu Jihad, and Salah Khalaf, who becomes Abu Yad. They're all there. They start a movement. They call it Fatah.
I've always wondered about that name. I know Fatah is the political party now, but is it just a random word?
No, it's a clever linguistic trick. The full name in Arabic is Harakat al-Tahrir al-Watani al-Filistini, the Palestinian National Liberation Movement.
Oh.
If you take the first letters of those words in reverse order, it spells FTH, Fatah.
Wait, why reverse order?
Because the forward acronym, HTF, or Hataf, means sudden death in Arabic.
Ah, not great for branding.
Terrible branding for a liberation movement. So they reversed it to Fatah, which has this powerful historical resonance. In an early Islamic context, it means conquest or opening, like opening a city to Islam.
It's evocative.
Very. But here's the real innovation of Fatah, and this is the key takeaway if you want to understand the politics of that era.
Okay, hit me. What made them different from all the other groups?
Independence. Before Arafat, most Palestinian groups were essentially puppets. They were funded by Egypt or by Syria or by Iraq.
So they had to toe the line?
They had to do what those governments wanted. They were pawns in a bigger Arab chess game. If Egypt wanted to annoy Israel, they'd tell the Palestinians to launch a raid. If Egypt wanted quiet, they'd tell them to sit down.
And Arafat, the engineer, looked at the schematics and saw a fundamental design flaw.
Exactly. He realized, if they pay us, they own us. So he decided to change the funding model entirely. He went to the wealthy Palestinians working in the Gulf oil fields, the engineers, the doctors, the teachers making good money, and asked them to tithe a portion of their income directly to Fatah.
He crowdfunded the revolution?
He essentially did. He built a war chest that was completely independent of Nasser in Egypt or the Ba'athists in Syria. And that financial independence allowed Fatah to make its own decisions. It was a huge deal.
It turned the Palestinian cause from a foreign policy tool of Arab states into a uniquely Palestinian national movement.
That's the whole ballgame. He basically privatized the liberation movement to safeguard it.
But a movement needs more than money. It needs a myth. It needs a defining battle. You can't build a revolution just on bank transfers from Kuwait.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to 1968 and a dusty, forgotten town in Jordan called Karameh.
This is listed in our timeline as the turning point. So set the scene for us. This is just after the Six-Day War, right?
Right. And to understand Karameh, you have to understand the mood of 1967. The Six-Day War was an absolute, unmitigated catastrophe for the Arab world.
A humiliation.
A total humiliation. Israel defeated the combined armies of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria in less than a week.
Yeah.
The Arab populations were demoralized. The conventional armies had failed utterly.
Into the guerrillas.
Exactly. Arafat and Fatah had set up a base in Jordan, and they were launching these, small but annoying cross-border raids into the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Israel decided they needed to stamp this out.
So they planned a major raid.
A huge raid on the Fatah headquarters in the town of Cairo with tanks and helicopters to wipe them out completely.
And typically in guerrilla warfare, rule number one is when a regular army advances with tanks, you melt away. You run. You live to fight another day.
That was the standard operating procedure. In fact, the Jordanian army intelligence got wind of the attack and tipped off Arafat. They told him, they're coming. You need to leave. You can't fight tanks with AK-47s.
But he made a different call.
A fateful one. He ordered his men to stay and fight.
Why? That sounds like a suicide mission.
It was about the narrative. He told his commanders, we need to break the image of the fleeing Arab. He wanted to show that Palestinians would stand their ground and die for their land, even against impossible odds.
So what happened in the actual battle? Did they win?
Tactically, no. It was a defeat for the Palestinians. The camp was destroyed. Many of their fighters were killed or captured. Arafat himself barely survived. But, and this is the big but,
The outcome was different.
the Israeli army took unexpected casualties. They lost tanks. They lost other vehicles. They were surprised by the ferocity of the resistance. And significantly, the Jordanian army's artillery eventually joined in to support the Palestinians. So he lost the battle, but he won the war of public opinion. Massively. It was a psychological victory that completely eclipsed the tactical defeat.
And the story that went out wasn't Fatah loses camp.
No, the story was someone finally stood up to the Israeli army. Almost overnight, Arafat's face was on the cover of Time magazine.
And that's when everything changes.
Everything. Recruitment skyrocketed. Thousands of young Arab men flocked to Jordan to join Fatah. Karameh transformed Arafat from a nuisance leader into a national hero. He became the face of the cause.
But this success in Jordan, it seems like it kind of went to his head, didn't it? It feels like Fatah got a little too comfortable there.
Hubris is the perfect word. By 1970, just 2 years later, Fatah had created what was essentially a state within a state in Jordan.
What does that mean in practice?
They were controlling entire cities and refugee camps. They were setting up their own roadblocks, collecting their own taxes. They were driving around Amman heavily armed, openly humiliating the Jordanian police. They were acting like they owned the kingdom.
I can't imagine a king taking that lightly for very long.
King Hussein of Jordan was patient, but he had his limits. The breaking point was the Dawson's Field hijackings.
Right, that was a huge international incident.
The PFLP, which was a more radical faction under Arafat's PLO umbrella, hijacked several international jets and flew them to a remote airstrip in the Jordanian desert.
And blew them up.
In front of the world's media. It was a massive embarrassment for the king. He decided enough was enough.
And this is what became known as Black September.
Yes. In September 1970, the king ordered the Jordanian army to crush the militias. It was a brutal, bloody civil war. Thousands of Palestinians died. The refugee camps were shelled. It was a massacre.
And Arafat, the survivor, had to flee for his life again.
He did. I read about the escape. There are all these rumors. Did he really dress up as a woman to get out?
That's the persistent rumor. The stories say he slipped out to Syria, possibly disguised in women's clothing to get through the checkpoints, or that he was smuggled out in the trunk of a Kuwaiti diplomatic vehicle.
We might never know the exact truth.
No, but the fact remains. He escaped when many of his top lieutenants didn't. So he gets kicked out of Jordan, and he moves the whole operation to Lebanon. And the cycle seems to just repeat itself.
It does. It's a pattern. Lebanon had a very weak central government, which was perfect for the PLO's purposes. They established a new base, a sort of mini-state called Fatahland in the south of the country.
But Lebanon was a powder keg.
A sectarian powder keg. And the PLO's massive armed presence helped light the fuse. Arafat tried to play the different factions against each other, but eventually the PLO became a major combatant in the Lebanese civil war.
And this leads to another one of those massive confrontations with Israel, the 1982 invasion.
Right. Israel invades Lebanon with the explicit goal of rooting out the PLO once and for all. They besiege West Beirut. For weeks, the city was under relentless bombardment.
And Arafat, with his flair for the dramatic,
declared Beirut the Hanoi and Stalingrad of the Israeli army. He was digging in for a glorious last stand.
But again, he survives. I feel like the theme of this deep dive is, and then Arafat escaped.
It really is.
Yeah.
A U.S. brokered deal negotiated by Philip Habib, allowed Arafat and his fighters safe passage out of Beirut. It was a surreal moment. He left on a ship, escorted by French naval vessels.
And he's on the deck flashing the victory sign.
Like he had just won the World Cup, even though he was being exiled to Tunisia, thousands of miles away from the borders of Israel.
Tunisia? That's a long way from the West Bank.
It is, and that distance changed everything. He was a leader without a land, operating out of a hotel in Tunis. But before we get to the politics of that era, we have to talk about his personal survival skills. Because looking at the sheer volume of attempts on his life, the fact that he died of illness is, frankly, statistically improbable.
Okay, let's run through the greatest hits of his survival, because it sounds like a spy novel.
It puts spy novels to shame. In Beirut, Ariel Sharon, who was the Israeli defense minister, created a special task force. The code name was Saltfish, and later Goldfish.
And their only job?
To track and kill Yasser Arafat. That's it. They were bombing buildings he was supposed to be in, sometimes just minutes after he had left.
So he became paranoid.
Rightfully so. He claimed in an interview in 1988 that he never slept in the same bed 2 nights in a row. He would schedule meetings in one location and then show up in a completely different one. He kept his own security team guessing.
And then there was the raid in Tunisia, right. Even 1,200 miles away, he wasn't safe.
Operation Wooden Leg, 1985. Israeli F-15s flew all the way across the Mediterranean to bomb his headquarters in Tunis. They flattened the building. 73 people died. Arafat survived. Do you know why?
Why?
He decided to go for a jog that morning.
You are kidding me. A jog?
A jog. If you'd been at his desk working, he would have been vaporized. Then jump forward to 1992. This one wasn't even an assassination attempt, just pure chance. He's on a private plane flying over the Libyan desert.
And a sandstorm hits.
A massive sandstorm. The plane has to crash land.
And a plane crash in the desert, that's usually the end of the story.
The pilots were killed. Several of his aides were killed. Arafat. He walked away with some bruises and a concussion. He was famously dubbed the cat with 9 lives.
It's incredible. But while he was dodging death, his political strategy was starting to shift. We see this move from the gun to the olive branch.
That phrase comes directly from his famous 1974 speech at the UN. He was the first representative of a non-state entity to ever address the General Assembly.
And he said that line.
He said, "I have come bearing an olive branch in one hand and a freedom fighter's rifle in the other. Do not let the green branch fall from my hand."
And he was wearing an empty holster during that speech?
The symbolism was everything. I am ready to talk, but I am still a soldier. But the real substantive shift happened in 1988. From exile in Tunis, he's watching the first intifada erupt back home.
Without him?
Without him. He's becoming irrelevant. He needed to get back in the game. So he formally renounced terrorism and accepted UN Resolution 242.
Which effectively meant recognizing Israel's right to exist.
Implicitly, yes. And for the Palestinian movement, this was a massive seismic concession. It was what allowed the U.S. to finally open a dialogue with the PLO.
But then, Arafat, true to his complex and often contradictory nature, made a colossal blunder that almost ruined everything.
The Gulf War.
1990. Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait.
And the entire world, including most of the Arab states, condemns Saddam. Arafat. He supports him.
Why? I mean, we just talked about how Kuwait gave him his start. Kuwait hosted thousands of Palestinians who were funding the PLO for decades.
It was a disastrous miscalculation. He was betting on the Arab street, which, loved Saddam's fiery anti-Western rhetoric. He thought Saddam might actually win, or at least reshape the entire region.
And the Gulf states were furious.
Livid. They expelled hundreds of thousands of Palestinian workers. They cut off all the funding. The PLO went nearly bankrupt overnight. Arafat was isolated diplomatically and totally broke financially.
And paradoxically, being broke and isolated might have been the very thing that pushed him toward peace.
Exactly. He needed a lifeline. He desperately needed a way back onto the world stage. And that desperation led to the secret back channels in Oslo, Norway.
The Oslo Accords, 1993.
The famous handshake on the White House lawn. You have Bill Clinton spreading his arms like a parent, separating 2 fighting kids. You have Yitzhak Rabin looking visibly uncomfortable.
And Arafat beaming.
Beaming. The deal was mutual recognition. The PLO recognizes Israel's right to exist. Israel recognizes the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. And it set up a framework for gradual self-rule.
And they all got the Nobel Peace Prize for it. Arafat, Rabin, and Shimon Peres.
Which was incredibly controversial at the time. But in 1994, Arafat did something he hadn't done in decades. He went home, He crossed the border into Gaza to lead the newly formed Palestinian National Authority.
That must have been a euphoric moment for his supporters.
It was hysteria. People were weeping in the streets, climbing on his car. But this is where the story shifts dramatically. It goes from the revolutionary to the authority. And Arafat found out that governing is very, very different from leading a guerrilla movement from afar.
Let's unpack his governance style. Because he didn't exactly set up a transparent Scandinavian-style democracy like Western donors might have hoped for.
No, not at all. He set up a patronage system. He centralized all power directly in his own hands. He appointed the mayors. He controlled all the different security services. And most importantly, he controlled the money.
The money is a huge topic here. There were allegations of massive, widespread corruption.
It's complicated. The scale of the money involved was immense. An IMF audit in 2003 found that Arafat had personally diverted about $900 million in public funds into accounts that he alone controlled.
So he stole it.
Well, the IMF was careful to note that the money wasn't necessarily stolen for personal luxury. A lot of it was used for Palestinian investments, but it was completely off the books, no oversight.
But there was also a secret portfolio, wasn't there?
Yes. U.S. investigators later found a secret portfolio worth close to $1 billion. We're talking about investments in a Coca-Cola plant in Ramallah, a Tunisian cell phone company, venture capital funds in the U.S.
So what was the purpose of hoarding all this cash? Was he just greedy?
It wasn't about greed in the sense of buying yachts and sports cars. It was about loyalty. Dennis Ross, the U.S. negotiator, called it walking around money. It's a system political scientists call neo-patrimonialism.
How did it work?
If a clan leader in Nablus was causing trouble, Arafat would pay him off. If a security chief needed new equipment or cars for his men, Arafat wrote a personal check. He built a system where every single faction depended on him personally for their money and power.
So the corruption was actually the glue holding his authority together?
Precisely. But it completely rotted the institutions from the inside out.
Mm.
And meanwhile, his wife Suha was living a very different life.
That was a source of major resentment among Palestinians, right?
Huge.
Yeah.
Arafat married Suha Tawil in 1990. She was much younger. She was a Christian who converted to Islam, and she lived in Paris on a very generous monthly stipend from the Palestinian Authority.
While people in Gaza were struggling.
Exactly. Arafat himself lived pretty modestly. He always wore the same uniforms, ate simple food, but the perception of corruption around his inner circle and his family was incredibly damaging.
So we have this corrupt, or at least non-transparent authority, but the peace process was still technically alive. Until Camp David 2000.
This is the tragic climax of the entire diplomacy era. Bill Clinton brings Arafat and the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak to Camp David for one last big push for a final agreement.
And Barak puts a significant offer on the table.
A very significant offer. A Palestinian state in about 90% of the West Bank and all of Gaza, with a capital in East Jerusalem, is more than had ever been offered before.
And Arafat said no.
He said no. And critically, he didn't make a counteroffer. He just walked away.
Why? What was the final deal breaker?
Jerusalem. Specifically, sovereignty over the Temple Mount, or as it's known to Muslims, the Haram al-Sharif, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is.
What was the offer for that?
Barak wanted to keep Israeli sovereignty over the site, but offered the Palestinians custodianship. Arafat famously told Bill Clinton, the Arab leader who would surrender Jerusalem is not born yet.
He was afraid of being seen as a traitor.
He was convinced that if he signed away sovereignty over the holy sites, he would be assassinated by his own people the next day. He felt the weight of the entire Islamic world on his shoulders, not just the Palestinians.
So the summit collapses, and very shortly after, the Second Intifada begins. And this was a much more violent uprising than the first one.
Much more. Suicide bombings in Israeli cities, a massive militarized response from Israel. It was a full-blown conflict.
And the big question has always been, did Arafat plan it? Or did he just get swept up in it?
It's fiercely debated. Some analysts say he simply rode the wave, that the anger was spontaneous after the peace talks failed, and he just tried to stay in front of it to remain relevant.
But others say he orchestrated it.
Others, including some Hamas leaders like Mahmoud al-Zahar, later claimed that Arafat actually gave them the green light. And there were documents seized by Israel from his compound that seemed to show him authorizing payments to militant groups.
This marked the absolute end of his relationship with the U.S. and Israel.
Completely. George W. Bush declared him a failed leader. Ariel Sharon, who is now the Prime Minister of Israel, called him irrelevant. And then Sharon did what he'd been trying to do for decades. He cornered him.
The siege of the Muqata.
His compound in Ramallah. For over 2 years, from 2002 onwards, Arafat was confined to just a few rooms. Israeli tanks surrounded the building. Bulldozers literally tore down the walls around him, bit by bit.
He was a prisoner.
He spent his final years in ruins, surrounded by the dust of the peace process he had helped start. He was ostensibly the president of Palestine, but he was prisoner in his own headquarters.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the biggest mystery, his death.
It all happens very fast. It's October 2004. Arafat is in the besieged compound, and he suddenly falls ill during a meeting. He's vomiting, he can't stand up. At first, his personal doctor said it was just a bad case of the flu.
But it got worse.
Much worse. His platelet count dropped dramatically. Eventually, Israel agreed to let him be flown to France, to the Percy military hospital outside Paris. He lapsed into a coma and died on November 11, 2004. He was 75.
And the official cause of death was?
A massive hemorrhagic stroke caused by a blood condition called disseminated intravascular coagulation, or DIC. But, and here's the mystery, the doctors couldn't find the underlying cause of the blood condition.
They couldn't figure out what triggered it.
Exactly. They ruled out cancer, they ruled out AIDS. Despite all the rumors circulating at the time, there was no clear explanation.
And immediately the theory started flying.
The Israelis poisoned him. That was the belief on the Palestinian street from day one. But for years, it was just a theory. There was no proof. Until 2012.
The Al Jazeera investigation?
Right. The news network Al Jazeera worked with a top Swiss forensic institute to test Arafat's personal belongings, his toothbrush, his hat, his cafetiere, which had been preserved by his widow, Suha.
And they found something.
They found polonium-210.
Polonium? That's a highly radioactive isotope. That's the same stuff that was used to kill Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko in London.
Exactly. It's an incredibly sophisticated poison. You don't buy it at the corner store. Its presence implies a state actor was involved. The Swiss found unusually high levels on his clothes.
So this led to his body being exhumed.
It did. It was a surreal scene. Arafat's body was dug up from his mausoleum in Ramallah for testing. 3 separate international teams took samples. A Swiss team, a French team, and a Russian team.
And did they all agree?
Of course not. That would be far too simple for the end of Yasser Arafat's story.
So what were the findings?
The Swiss team said the levels of polonium they found in his bones were 18 to 36 times higher than the average, and that the results reasonably supported the poisoning theory. One prominent forensic scientist called the presence of that much polonium a smoking gun.
But the other teams disagreed.
The French and Russian teams both claimed that the polonium was likely from environmental contamination after his death and concluded that he died of natural causes. The French closed their inquiry in 2015.
So even in death, there's no consensus?
No consensus at all. Just conflicting narratives inextricably linked to the conflict itself. For many Palestinians, the Swiss report is the final word. They believe he was assassinated.
So let's try to sum this all up. We've looked at the engineer, the guerrilla, the statesman, and the prisoner. At the end of the day, what is the legacy of Yasser Arafat?
It depends entirely on where you stand. To many, many Israelis, he was the ultimate obstacle to peace. He was a man who had the chance to build a state at Camp David in 2000, but chose violence instead. Ariel Sharon called him a Jew murderer. They see him as the man who legitimized terrorism as a political tool on the world stage.
And to Palestinians.
He is the father. He's the symbol of their struggle. You have to remember, before Arafat, the Palestinians were often seen by the world simply as refugees, a humanitarian problem to be solved with tents and food aid.
He gave them a political identity?
A national identity. He forced the world to recognize them as a people with a political cause. He put Palestine on the map. Even his fiercest critics within Palestine, and there were many who hated his corruption and his authoritarianism, even they would have to admit that he kept the cause alive against absolutely impossible odds.
He was, above all else, a survivor.
He outlasted Nasser. He outlasted King Hussein. He outlasted Sadat. He outlasted the Soviet Union. But in the end, he couldn't outlast the failure of the peace process.
It's a heavy story. But here's a thought to leave you with, something to chew on as we wrap up. We talked about Camp David in 2000. It's one of the biggest what-ifs in modern history.
If Arafat had said yes.
Exactly. Just think about it. If he had accepted that deal, 90% of the West Bank, a capital in East Jerusalem, what would the Middle East look like today? Would there be a thriving, peaceful Palestinian state? Would Hamas have ever taken power in Gaza?
Or would he have been assassinated by his own people the moment he signed it, just like Anwar Sadat was in Egypt for making peace?
It is the ultimate counterfactual. And the fact that we are still asking that question all these years later shows just how much one man's decision or indecision can shape the lives of millions.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.